Let's open with a word of prayer. Gracious God, we continue to celebrate the resurrection of your Son, Jesus Christ. Continue to equip the church, equip us now in this place to carry out your word and share your spirit of the great news of eternal life. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, so here we are in session 18, okay, and where we finished up, we've been sort of on these trips and of these missionary adventures of the Apostle Paul. A couple times ago, we're talking about he starts to set his mind toward Jerusalem. Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem as well, and we talked about how in the same manner they encouraged Jesus not to go to Jerusalem. They are now in a lot of ways encouraging Paul not to go to Jerusalem because they're afraid of what's going to happen with him. So what they feared is exactly what takes place. And so Paul is taken into custody. Remember that the cohorts come down, the Roman guards, and they're about to whip him. And he says, oh, by the way, I'm a Roman citizen. He hasn't had a trial, and immediately gloves are off. And so at this point then, Paul is given an audience, and we go. So let's pick up here with chapter 23. As we finished last time, Paul is getting ready to speak. Would somebody read? Let's do 1 through 11, actually, in chapter 23. Missy?
While Paul was looking intently at the council, he said, "Brothers, up to this day I have lived my life with a clear conscience before God." Then the high priest Ananias ordered those standing near him to strike him on the mouth. At this Paul said to him, "God will strike you, you whitewashed wall." Well, are you sitting there? I don't remember this in the King James.
Yeah, it's there, actually.
When Paul noticed that some were Sadducees and others were Pharisees, he called out in the council, "Brothers, I am a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees. I am in trial concerning the hope of the resurrection of the dead." When he said this, a dissension began between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. The Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, or angel, or spirit, but the Pharisees acknowledge all three. Then a great clamor arose, and certain scribes of the Pharisees' group stood up and contended, "We find nothing wrong with this man. What if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him?" When the dissension became violent, the tribune, fearing that they would tear Paul to pieces, ordered the soldiers to go down, take him by force, and bring him into the barracks. That night the Lord stood near him and said, "Keep up your courage, for just as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must bear witness also in Rome."
Okay, thank you. It is thought, if we go back and talk about a little bit of the geography, where this is taking place, this is on Fort Antonio. Now, remember, Herod the Great is the one that's sort of the mixed figure in history for the Jews at that time, because while he sold out to the Romans, he also did things for the Jews. And one of them was to rebuild the temple. So the Jews are like, hey, happy we're getting our temple back. But he also had built, named after Caesar's son Antonio, this little thing right outside this mount, and that was higher than the temple, so that the temple guards, the Roman guards, could stand up here, look down, and see what was taking place in the different levels of the temple. So they weren't so thrilled about that. And this is where they believe this is taking place. Now remember, that's why partly when the riot, or when Jesus goes into the temple and upsets things and the guards, all this takes place down here. They're up here watching, so they saw things that took place in the temple. So when Jesus cleanses the temple and all the upsets and stuff, the Roman guards would have saw all that and watched that. And that's what some give credence to the theory that why didn't they come down at that point and intersperse with them at that point to get the crowds taken care of and dispersed so that that there would be no more disturbance in the temple. And the reason is thought that what happened was that Barabbas had made his uprising at the same time. And that there was an uprising over here, so the Roman guards and stuff had already left the Antonio Mount and went down to settle that riot that Barabbas had led. And so some people begin to think about, well, did Jesus know that? Did Jesus know that he could do that in the temple that day and get away with it without the Romans pouring down here, or that they were on a more skeleton crew, or if any, were left up there? And some try to make the case, and maybe so, that, yeah, I did. Because why? Well, this was a zealot. Barabbas was a zealot. This was a zealot uprising, and one of Jesus' disciples is Simon the Zealot. He had a zealot for a disciple. So was there some communication that Simon said, oh, by the way, Barabbas is going to be doing this? And Jesus goes in the temple and goes, yeah, the Roman guards aren't going to run down in here. They're preoccupied. Some people talk about the timing of that, but that's one of those arguments from silence, but some thought. So we think this is where this took place. Paul's on trial here. He looks intently at the council. Paul's going to use his pattern that he's used. He's been in these situations how many times already that we know about, of being under duress for what he's been about. This time, of course, it's a little bit different, because this is in his home turf. This is where he's from. We talked about these are the people he grew up with. These are the people, quote unquote, that he went to Jewish school with. This is the people he learned to be Pharisees with. These are people who know Paul. Ananias is the high priest, and we know that he was in rule from 47 to 59, which is why we can begin to date some of these things. It's probably closer to like 56, 57 when this is happening. This is toward the end of his reign, but this helps us get a sense of when these things took place. And of course, when he says, I have a clear conscience before God, the high priest orders somebody standing near him, strike him in the mouth. Okay? And then we have that, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. Okay? And so whitewashed wall, this sense from the Greek, what was it? It was this sort of like this, you used up, you've done you're nothing anymore, you're wiped over. Now people say, and then they go, well, wait a minute, do you dare to insult God's high priest? As a Jew, you wouldn't do that. And so now we have this answer from Paul. Paul says, I did not realize, brothers, that he was the high priest. Now, people take this in different ways. That one, Paul is, remember, Paul has eye issues. Remember, his sight does not come back fully from being blind along the road. He makes reference to it. So did he, in fact, because the high priest would be pretty well known. It's sort of like saying, oh, I didn't realize that was President Biden. You know what I mean? You would kind of know who he is, you know? So is it that his eyesight was bad and he didn't realize it because somebody ordered it from across the room and he doesn't know? Or is it because, they didn't have TV news to watch their leader on, that maybe he had been gone. Maybe he didn't know who he was. That is absolutely a possibility. Or is this a little bit of sarcasm? Because a high priest before trial would not recommend somebody to be slapped in the mouth. Sort of it's like, oh, because I did not realize you should not speak evil. Because in other words, he's sort of saying a high priest wouldn't act that way. So that couldn't have been the high priest that did this to me. We don't know. So, but with Paul doesn't back down from anybody, calls him a whitewashed wall. Sarcasm could very much be in play here. So people have different perspectives to say, did he really know, or was he sort of making commentary here? Because Paul does not back down. And then Paul looks around and sees who's in this room here. With it being the Sanhedrin, he would well know that there were Sadducees there. Remember, Paul is a Pharisee. He says that. He points that out. I'm a Pharisee. I'm a son of a Pharisee. And Paul is a little manipulative here. He says, I'm on trial concerning the hope of the resurrection of the dead. One of the main divisive issues between the Sadducees and Pharisees is this whole talk about resurrection of the dead. Again, when we talk about the Pharisees and Sadducees, like I said, I've many times said, it's sort of like talking about Democrats and Republicans. They're both leaders of the nation, okay? But they each tend to have typical things that they tend to be for or tend to be against. But they're still part of the Sanhedrin. They're still, leaders, even though they come from different sects. So here's some things. The Pharisees were very concerned about the law. They're the ones that are always confronting, not that the Sadducees weren't, but that was really important to them, where the Sadducees are sort of built around the temple. They're tied to the temple with all the rites that are happening there, which is one of the reasons why the Sadducees, when the Romans come in and destroy the temple, the Sadducees sort of become extinct, if you will, because there's no temple to practice over. So the Pharisees continue past this, and the Sadducees sort of go extinct. The Pharisees worried about interpretation of the Torah. They included the other readings written around the Torah. The Sadducees just held to the Torah alone. Pharisees tended to be middle class. Pharisees, sometimes we forget in the Scripture, were sort of the religious people of the people. That the Sadducees were sort of more, felt like they were, the people thought that they were upper class. They were sort of, more elite. They acted above everyone else. Pharisees were more people of the dead. And then this whole sense of resurrection of the dead, no resurrection, belief in afterlife, no afterlife was the Sadducees. And then the Pharisees rejected the Jewish leaders, where the Sadducees supported them. Well, they supported them for a couple reasons, because that's where you're talking about, like Herod the Great, Pontius Pilate, the sons of Herod, because the Sadducees were sort of for anything that sort of allowed them to keep the temple and keep it going for the people. That was their will. Where the Pharisees sort of said, we're supposed to be an independent nation before God. We're selling out. And so you can see the rub. You can make the case for both, because if you just, what happened, the Sadducees in some ways were like, you guys keep rebelling against it, it's going to backfire. And guess what happens? It did, and the temple did get wiped out. So in that sense, the Sadducees were correct to try to keep and protect everybody, where the Pharisees were saying, if we're to be one nation, we need to reject all that. And it's always sort of going along with those kinds of things when politics and religion sort of combine. So what's Paul do? He pushes the hot button issue right away. He says, this isn't a trial, but this is a trial about resurrection of the dead. Well, then all of a sudden the Pharisees are like, what? We'll support that. And then the Sadducees, they're like, and so he knows, and it's just sort of saying, well, today we may use words like, I think there should be a wall between the United States and Mexico. Okay, well, now everybody's ready to go. Or I think health care should be for every right of every citizen. Well, now people are ready to go. So he knows what to press. So the people, and what happens? Boom, boom, there they go. They start arguing about that. They debate about that. And so Paul has sort of this like diversion going on. It says in 9, then a great clamor arose, and certain scribes of the Pharisees stood up. We find nothing wrong with this guy. He's a Pharisee. That's right. He's one of us. And what if an angel spirit has spoken to him? Well, they didn't believe in that. So Sadducees would say that didn't happen. And so when the dissension became violent, the tribune, fearing that they would tear Paul to pieces, ordered the soldiers to go down. Remember that picture? Ordered them to go down. I mean, they're not in the temple here, but they're still around, and break it up. And they take them back into the barracks, which would have been in this Temple Mount. And so he's back in the barracks, and then in verse 11, that night, the Lord, meaning Jesus, stood near him and said, keep your courage, for just as you testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must bear witness also in Rome. Now, remember some other visions before. The vision sort of, you're going to be all right, Paul. This time it's like, no, just hang in there. You're not going to be necessarily all right, but just hang in there, because there's a little tip. You're going to end up in Rome over this one. So it's a little bit, Paul, but think about how many times we have been in situations of dire need and struggling, and it would be kind of nice for Jesus to come in and say, take courage, have this appearance, you'll get through this. I would appreciate that from time to time. Even if it doesn't say remove it, that you'll still take courage. You'll go through it. So Paul gets that. We do not typically, but Paul is told to keep up his courage. So let's see what then happens. Let's tackle 23 through 35. Let's go ahead and finish this chapter. Or 12, sorry, 12. Let's do 12 through 22. Excuse me, I skipped the whole section. 12 through 22. Thank you.
In the morning the Jews joined in the conspiracy and bound themselves by an oath neither to eat nor drink until they had killed Paul. There were more than 40 who joined in this conspiracy. They went to the chief priests and elders and said, "We have strictly bound ourselves by an oath to taste no food until we have killed Paul. Now then, you and the council must notify the tribune to bring him down to you, on the pretext that you want to make a more thorough examination of his case, and we are ready to do away with him before he arrives." Now the son of Paul's sister heard about the ambush, so he went and gained entrance to the barracks and told Paul. Paul called one of the centurions and said, "Take this young man to the tribune, for he has something to report to him." So he took him, brought him to the tribune and said, "The prisoner Paul called me and asked me to bring this young man to you. He has something to tell you." The tribune took him by the hand, drew him aside privately, and asked, "What is it that you have to report to me?" He answered, "The Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire more thoroughly into his case. But do not be persuaded by them, for more than 40 of their men are lying in ambush for him. They have bound themselves by an oath neither to eat nor drink until they kill him. They are ready now and are waiting for your consent." So the tribune dismissed the young man, ordering him, "Tell no one that you have informed me of this."
All right, so if the law don't work, take it into your own hands. And this is what we see happening. These are what? Religious people who believe in the commandments, who say things are not going my way. And so you get this group that is pretty outraged, gets together, they make an oath among themselves, we are going to get rid of this guy. They go to the chief priests and elders and say, "Hey, we made this thing." The leaders go, "Oh, well, that's okay." They're sort of like, "Well, if that's what you feel like you need to do." They kind of basically wink, wink, okay, and they let it slide. But word gets out. Word gets to that this is going on. And, it's a state of affairs when the religious leaders deteriorate to this point that we got to kill somebody to stop the message. When we think about that in alone itself, and think about in history, when that has happened, that we have to take matters in our own hand to silence this voice that we say is not speaking God's word. God, you're not doing enough, so we're going to help you out here, and that usually bodes for trouble. But what's interesting here, we get this little line on 16. Now the son of Paul's sister. We don't know anything about Paul's family, but here is this little reference to his nephew, who, again, living in Jerusalem. Paul has a sister. I mean, we don't know anything else about this, but there it is. Paul has a sister. She has a son. They're obviously supportive of what Paul is doing, and so the son gets word. He goes, nephew, and goes into Paul. This kid, we have no idea what age he is. Maybe he's sort of sitting in this room, and he hears all this, and so he goes. Paul's allowed some visitors. He visits Paul and says, "Look, there's an ambush being planned," and Paul says, go tell the Roman officials what's going on, and they let him do that. And they say, he goes and says there's an ambush waiting. They're going to ask, like, well, we want to hear Paul out one more time, see what he has to say, but this is all a setup to do this. And when we think of assassinations in even just our country, and like Bobby, people bring them in and all these things, that how they know which way they're going to go and all these stuff, the conspiracies, this is sort of like that, that what's happening here, it's a setup. And but word gets back, and the Roman officials, and we think, well, they listen to them, and he tells the young man, don't tell anybody you inform me of this. And we think, well, why is the Romans being so helpful here to Paul? Well, number one, remember, they've already about whipped him, and he hadn't even had a trial yet, which was not, for a Roman citizen, was against the law, so they're already in trouble. Paul's not your average citizen that nobody's heard about. Paul has some fame to him, and we know when people are arrested with any kind of fame, people sort of check things twice or be a little bit more careful. So Paul has, some reputation, and I think probably also if the Romans have figured out there's more to this story than what's happening here. This is some jealousy going on, and if they're going to ambush them, there's something here. So he is sent. So he's sent to Felix the governor. So now let's do 23 through 35. Thank you.
Then he summoned two of the centurions and said, get ready to leave by 9 o'clock tonight for Caesarea, with 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen. Also provide mounts for Paul to ride and take him safely to Felix the governor. He wrote a letter to this effect. Claudius Lysias, to his excellent the governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them. But when I have learned that he was a Roman citizen, I came with a guard and rescued him. Since I wanted to know the charge for which they accused him, I had him brought to their council. I found that he was accused concerning questions of their law, but he was charged with nothing deserving death or imprisonment. When I was informed that there would be a plot against the man, I sent him to you at once, ordering his accusers also to state before you what they have against him. So the soldiers, according to their instructions, took Paul and brought him during the night to
Antipater. Go ahead.
Huh?
Go ahead.
The next day they let the horsemen go with him while they returned to the barracks. When they came to Caesarea and delivered the letter to the governor, they presented Paul also before him. On reading the letter, he asked what province he belonged to, and when he had learned that he was from Sicilia, he said, I will give you a hearing when your accusers arrive. Then he ordered that he be kept under guard in Herod's headquarters.
Okay. All right, so an interesting thing. They go at 9 o'clock at night. Again, when we think about things at night during that time, that's definitely by stealth. And he hears there's 40 guys that are out to get him. So he's not just equipping this entourage with 41 so that they can beat it. He doesn't want the battle. They want a show of force so that if there is 40 people intent on attacking Paul, when they see that many people, it's overkill. You're probably not even going to have the battle at that point. So he makes sure of that. 200 soldiers, for crying out loud, 70 horsemen, 200 spearmen. This is a big movement through the night. And then, it's interesting here that he sent to Felix. We're going to talk about him in a second. But Luke says he wrote a letter to this effect. Even Luke saying, I might not read, but this is basically what it said. So he has a sense of what this letter is being written and what it's about. Maybe he didn't know it verbatim, didn't see it personally, but had a sense that it was being read or whatever. Or the other thing people talk about is that one of the things that would have happened for people that first read this is that just like today, the court system is the court system. And so if people wanted to say, did this really happen? They could go to the Roman records. This was entered into the court. This was written down. There were records of this kind of stuff. And so maybe Luke goes, let me go to the court. What was read, and sees these acts and stuff like that. That they no doubt recorded some of this. They kept record keeping. Not quite like digitally like we can today, but there was a sense of record keeping on people. Sometimes we can think about everybody sort of being, back in those times that they don't, it's all rocks and, you know what I mean, that they're all like cavemen or whatever, and it's not. They're very sophisticated and all this stuff, different technologies, but at the time. So Felix, we have pictures of him even on coins and so forth. He definitely existed. Many references outside him. And he is basically the procurator like Pilate was. Okay? He's the next Pilate. We'll talk about that here in a few moments. But when they travel, it says this. Here we are in back in Jerusalem. And they travel up to, here's where they spend the night. And then here they go on then to Caesarea. Caesarea, it's sort of like if you were, what would be equivalent place? I don't know. Where you want your headquarters to be, because you want your headquarters to be, this is a lot nicer area, okay? This is on the beach. And so this is where Herod builds his place. This is where Rome sort of outfits. It's right on the Mediterranean Sea, so just whoop right up. You can go up to Rome, even though they ruled down in Judea. This is in that area, and so they almost reluctantly go to Jerusalem, if you will, but rather because Caesarea is where the nice spots are. This is a picture of Caesarea from an airplane shot of sort of of today, obviously. But you can still go, and I got a couple pictures here of when I was there. You can go see these spots where these places existed. Still today, the ruins of them are very much there. This is a picture I took. I was there out when this Caesarea, and you can see these columns and so forth being for where these things took place. This is it from a distance. And then even here they have plates referring to verses in Acts. To where these things happen that we're reading about. These ones actually are in 25 that we'll be getting to, but there's these other references to these things taking place. So now he's in Caesarea, and again, there's some coins with Felix engraving on it. But Caesarea is a major landmark, major spot in ancient Israel, seaport, the whole thing about Romans. That's exactly a major place to be. And that's where Herod would often go, he wanted to govern from there, and his headquarters there, instead of being in Jerusalem where the temple was, and it was just, I get caught in all this Jewish stuff. I want to be up here where Jews were, but it wasn't quite the episode as around the temple. But, of course, when Passover's coming, you can't get away with being that far away. You got to get to Jerusalem and be there in case something happens. And, of course, with Pontius Pilate, we know that a lot of things did happen. Felix, he marries Drusilla, which we'll talk about in the next chapter, who's the daughter of one of the Herod's grandsons, and functions like that. And eventually Felix, the governor, he eventually is outed from his position because the Jews and Gentiles unrest grows so much. There's a couple of uprisings in the northern part, and they come in and they replace him with Festus because Felix is not handling it well. So that's why when these issues came up, they want peace, they want calm, they don't want to try to incite one side over the other side. That's why they're not just saying, Paul, you're innocent, we think you are, you're free, no, because they'll get upset the Jews. And so this is in the bigger picture is going on is that the boiling sides of being under Roman occupation is growing among the Jews, and the frustration of this. And so this is happening within this bigger picture of just being dominated by another empire and wanting to be independent again. So this adds some backdrop, if you will, to what's going on here and why maybe Rome is, a little bit more careful about certain things. And so we get this letter, and then these places, and he's allowed to stay in Herod's headquarters. He's put under arrest there. All right, let's pick up then chapter 24, and let's start with the first 9 verses. Thank you.
5 days later, the high priest Ananias came down with some elders and an attorney, a certain Tertullus, and they reported their case against Paul to the governor. When Paul had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, "Your Excellency, because of you, we have long enjoyed peace, and reforms have been made for this people because of your foresight. We welcome this in every way and everywhere with utmost gratitude. But, to detain you no further, I beg you to hear us briefly with your customary graciousness. We have, in fact, found this man a pestilent fellow, an agitator among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple, and so we seized him. By examining him yourself, you will be able to learn from him concerning everything of which we accuse him." The Jews also joined in charge by asserting that all this was true.
Okay, so here comes the high priest. They're going to Caesarea because they're going to have it there. It's been moved out of Jerusalem, where it's a little hot to handle. We hear about that today, where sometimes a court case is moved out of the area because it's a little hot in temperature there. So they move them to Caesarea. The Romans back there that are underlings to the governor, the procurator, are like, this is bigger than us. Let's get Felix involved. And they go and he tells you, you can make your same case there, but you need to go there where Felix is at. And so the Jews say, okay, they get the high priest, but what do? They bring a hired gun with them. They get counsel. And then the counsel comes, and we assume this person's Jewish, and he makes this case with just a yuckiness of selling one's soul out, okay? This might be why sometimes lawyers get bad reputations. Maybe it all started back here. But Your Excellency, because we have long enjoyed peace. Remember, this is the backdrop of Felix is trying to keep the peace like the people before him. We have long, and reforms have been made for this people because of your foresight. We welcome this in every way. Oh my gosh, with utmost gratitude. But to detain you no further, we are a busy man. I beg you to briefly, with your customary graciousness, we haven't found fact this man to be a pestilent fellow. I love that phrase. He's kind of bugging us. And so, would you just mind killing him? You know, it's just really, wow, how low can you go? We have all kinds of words for this kind of approach to things. So it's a little. I mean, I'm sure Luke here doesn't hesitate in dripping this with a little bit of ugly syrup, if you will, as he's writing this. Probably so turned off about it all, and probably didn't hesitate to play up some of these things that was really they found pretty disgusting. All right. Now, so Paul gets a turn. Let's look at 10 through 21. Thank you.
When the governor motioned to him to speak, Paul replied, "I cheerfully make my defense, knowing that for many years you have been a judge over this nation. As you can find out, it is not more than 12 days since I went up to worship in Jerusalem. They did not find me disputing with anyone in the temple or stirring up a crowd either in the synagogues or throughout the city. Neither can they prove to you the charge that they now bring against me. But this I admit to you, that according to the way, which they call a sect, I worship the God of our ancestors, believing everything laid down according to the law or written in the prophets. I have a hope in God, a hope that they themselves also accept, that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the unrighteous. Therefore I do my best always to have a clear conscience towards God and all people. Now after some years I came to bring alms to my nation and to offer sacrifices. When I was doing this, they found me in the temple, completely claiming the right of purification, without any crowd or disturbance. But there were some Jews from Asia. They ought to be here before you to make an accusation, if they have anything against me. Or let these men here tell what crime they had found when I stood before the council, unless it was this one sentence that I called out while standing before them. It is about the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial before you today. But Felix, who was rather well informed about the way, adjourned the meeting with the comment, when Lysias the tribune comes down, I will decide your case. Then he ordered the centurion to keep him in custody, but to let him have some liberty, and not to prevent any of his friends from taking care of his needs.
All right, so we get Paul's side. Paul's defense is rather different here than in other places. He's not going to take this one. He's standing up for himself. He's arguing the law back. He's making rather a strong defense. And he starts out by, I cheerfully make my defense, knowing, and so here's his flattering, know that you've been a judge over this nation for many years. So that's Paul's flattery. He recognizes it, says you've been doing this for a while. And that's it. He states a fact. He doesn't try to syrup him or sweet talk him into a position. He acknowledges it. Then he goes in and he said, "Look," he tells the truth. They didn't find me. I wasn't uprising crowds. I was in the temple. Remember, he went in and the elders of the church said, "Why don't you do a Jewish purification to show that you are still one of us?" He's going through all this stuff to do that, to show that. And he said, I wasn't stirring a crowd. He didn't go into the synagogues and do what he did when he was on his missionary trips. So he shows his roots as a Pharisee there. And he says, hey, look, I have much hope in God. They have this too. And about the resurrection of the dead. By the way, they believe in this as well. So he's using some nuances here. He's not saying quite they missed the Messiah. He doesn't quite go that angle. But just basically like we share some things in common. I am one of them. They're upset. It's a different tactic from Paul, but what he's saying is true. In a sense, it's work, because what it says, Felix, the governor, was rather well informed along the way. We're going to talk about that here shortly in just a minute. But he knows a little bit more about what's going on. He has his ear to the ground a little bit more, mainly because of his wife. And so this is happening. This can be dated. What's interesting, this is probably around 57. Think about that. If we think Jesus was born 4 to 6 BC, because they're just off a little bit, and you add the 33 years, this is already 30 years after Jesus had been resurrected. Sometimes I think we can think of this happening like this is a few years after. This is 30 years. This is like a generational thing. 3 decades later of these things happening. So Felix knows about this. Word has gotten around. The people of the way, again, this isn't a new religion in a sense that it's, again, only been around. This is 3 decades later. They're still established. People know them now. They're in the community. And Felix knows something about that. And so he sort of keeps them in house arrest, but gives quite a bit of liberty that his friends can come and go and visit him. He's keeping them rather relaxed. Felix is trying again to juggle and keep the peace. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about Drusilla, but let's go ahead first and let's finish out the chapter, and then we'll summarize the rest of this stuff here. Let me see. Mm-hmm.
Some days later, when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, he sent for Paul and heard him speak concerning faith in Christ Jesus. And as he discussed justice, self-control, and the coming judgment, Felix became frightened and said, "Go away for the present. When I have an opportunity, I will send for you." At the same time, he hoped that money would be given to him by Paul. For that reason, he used to send for him very often and converse with him. After 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and since he wanted to grant the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison.
Okay. All right. So now we're getting the other side of Felix. It starts to get a little close to home here. So I I want to talk about some of these people in here. Okay, remember Drusilla. Here's how she fits into this picture. Here's Herod the Great. Remember, he had all these wives, and then they had all these sons and all that. And I always talk about Herod the Great being the George Foreman of his time because George Foreman named all his kids George, remember? So Herod names all his kids Herod too, but they have these other names beside them, so they're not referenced. And so some of them are killed, some of them he gets a little jealous and has oft and all these kind of things. But he basically, when he dies, he wants his sons to take over. He's got the whole area. So they basically divide it up into 3 areas. And Antipas, Aristobulus, and Archelaus, get to take it over. And the third son, maybe it's Aristobulus, I might be getting that mixed up. But he's the one that gets, the one son gets the Jerusalem area. He can't handle it. It's the temple. He's incompetent. Again, Herod was friendly to Rome. He did a lot of things for Rome. He walked the line. He was like hated by both and loved by both in some ways, Romans and Jews. So Rome decides, okay, this son can't handle Jerusalem. And so he's booted pretty quickly. And so, but instead of giving another relative, that's why they bring in a procurator. Rome says, we'll bring in our own person into the position, and they rule. So that's why you have these 2 territories still ruled by the Herod family, and you have the Jerusalem area ruled by an appointee, which we call procurators, or sometimes referred to as curators, and there's minor differences and those kinds of things at different times. But and then they have sons, of course. But here we get down to, if we look at Drusilla, who's sister of Herod Agrippa II, the grandson of Herod the Great. Okay, so we have that. So she's the sister, and she's actually married to somebody. But when Felix comes in, he kind of sees her from a distance, one of those things, and says, hey, I think I like her. And the next thing you know, Drusilla is now married to Felix. Okay? But, again, as we even back here with Herod Antipas is the one who beheads John the Baptist. He's up in Galilee area, remember? That's why, remember, Herod Antipas is in Jerusalem because of the Jews being in Passover, and that's why when Pilate finds out, hey, Herod's in town from Galilee, Jesus from Galilee, he says, I'll shift him over to him. And Herod's like, he wants to meet with him because he's curious, but he shifts him back. And then it says in there that they became friends that day. But remember, John the Baptist is killed by one because he talks about you married your brother's sister and all this kind of stuff that's going on. But they are always curious about Jesus. They said they wanted to meet him. They were curious, like they were curious about even John the Baptist. Remember, they don't even kill him when they take him. They keep him in jail because it says he was sort of taken by what John the Baptist was doing and saying a little bit. And so there's this curiosity factor that exists. And so what happens is that this sort of carries on. And so even Drusilla now, when we get into grandchildren, this movement of the way of Christians is known, and there's some curiosity about this because they are, in fact, partly Jewish. And so Drusilla most likely filled in Felix about this. So Felix may be a little bit intrigued. And so it says they come with his wife. They have an audience for the famous Paul, this missionary, this big leader of this movement. They get to meet him, and then Paul speaks to him about concerning his faith in Jesus Christ. All this happens. But what's Felix's reaction? He doesn't go, I think I want to join. Felix instead becomes very frightened by it all. A fear of judgment. And he knows how him and Drusilla got together. He knows all this other stuff. He knows this could be trouble. And so he doesn't kill him because, again, he doesn't want to riot from the Christians and people that are for Paul. He wants to placate the Jews, so he keeps them. But he keeps hoping that he'll get bribed. He's willing to take it. If he gets enough money, and that was practice in that time too, you get enough money, he is set free, and he's kind of hoping, here's the whole way. They want Paul out. Surely they're going to come to me and say, here's a little bit of vacation money. Let Paul go, and then maybe he was going to take the risk. Here, some of these procurators, there's these coins that exist from their time. Again, it starts about 6 ADs when the son of Herod is booted out, and these different ones come in, and they've found coins from them that exist. Again, these archaeological digs or discoveries and so forth that sort of give credence to what is said in the Bible. They definitely exist here. So here's a coin that I showed before, Felix, and then here's one that was referenced today, Festus, who takes over at the end of this chapter, and who only actually is there for a few years. You know, we always talk about that for these procurators to go down into Judea to rule, your goal was no news is good news for Rome. So the more you kept the peace, the better. And because why? I'm doing good down here. I'm going to get promoted. I'm going to be back up eating spaghetti in Italy and enjoying the Italian life, you know. So I want to do the right thing, so I get promoted. You know, and I always said about these two, the predecessor right before Pontius Pilate is the only one that ended up reigned longer than Pontius Pilate. So Pontius Pilate was down there quite a long time. Okay, these other ones not so much. Here's a list of all of them here that you get in, and you see Agrippa listed here is because at a point there's a period of time where they don't have anybody there, but Agrippa, who's in one of these other areas, he's doing well, and they said, just take that over for a few years, and then eventually bring somebody else in. And you see we get down here toward, we just left Felix, and it's headed over to Festus, and you can see the handwriting's on the wall. It's not going to go very much farther than this because Rome's going to come in and just wipe everything out, okay, and they're going to be majorly in control, all right? But how long does this last? How long is Paul being held here? 2 years. This goes on for 2 years. He's in Caesarea, sort of waiting for this. Felix keeps hoping maybe he'll get some money. Then he doesn't want to rule almost, because if he rules and lets Paul out, he wants some payoff for it, and the payoff's not coming. But to let Paul go free, he doesn't want to get the Jews upset. Again, remember this backdrop down there. It's already a hotbed of uprising. He doesn't need any more. And so he just basically lets it sit. And nobody can really do that thing. It's just one of those things where it just keeps getting, comes up on the court docket. Oh, let's delay this. There's something, they need more time for this or whatever. It just lets it go. And so that he can finally hand it off to Festus and be done with the whole thing is sort of, you get a sense of Felix's goal by the longer I drag my feet. But eventually Felix is outed, and that's what we'll pick up next time. Any questions? All right, we are making progress. We will pick up with chapter 25 next week.